welcome to CEC lectures. Myself Dr. Preeti Jagmani from Department of Computer Science, Arabhat College, University of Delhi. As you all are aware that presently we are learning a series of operating system concepts, and the module which we are dealing presently is about deadlocks. And we have also seen some lectures of the deadlock, about what actually deadlock is and how to deal with deadlock. So today's lecture is going to be a last lecture in the topic of deadlocks, that is about dealing with deadlocks. So we have seen many strategies in order to how to tackle the deadlocks. So here we proceed with the similar idea. So now today's topic is about the detection of deadlock. So for example, when we have seen in the starting of this particular module, we have seen that what could all be the strategies in kind of dealing with deadlocks. So that could be a deadlock avoidance algorithm or deadlock prevention algorithm, but all these algorithms are we can say are kind of costly algorithms in terms of resources. Some resources are to be kind of blocked, or processes are need to be kind of accounted in terms of what resources they are looking for. So it is not necessary that all the systems should employ either a deadlock prevention or a deadlock avoidance algorithm. So in absence of these two, that is if the system is not going with deadlock prevention or the system is not employing even a deadlock avoidance algorithm, then it is a perfect possibility in case of a multi-process system that the deadlock may occur. So now the system is not having prevention algorithm, system is not having avoidance algorithm, and the deadlock has occurred. Now what is to be done here? So in this situation, the system may provide an algorithm to examine the state, to examine its own state, and the algorithm is going to determine whether the deadlock has occurred, and if yes, that deadlock has occurred, how to recover from the algorithm. So basically now we are talking about, we are not taking any proactive measures of avoidance or prevention. We are in a state that deadlock has occurred. Now we are about taking the detection and recovery schemes. So this is what the deadlock detection schemes are. And a detection and recovery scheme is actually, if you can see, it is kind of a very costly process. It requires an overhead. What kind of overhead I am talking about? That is, it needs to maintain the necessary information of execution of this detection algorithm, and even if deadlock has occurred, then there are potential losses inherent in recovering from a deadlock. So first of all, regular kind of, or we can say checking or execution of detection algorithm, and then if the deadlock has occurred, then system has to obviously recover from the deadlock. We cannot be in we cannot leave the system in a deadlocked state for too long. So we need to recover from that also. So in case of we have if we in case of resources, if we have single instance for each resource type, or we have multiple instances of each resource types, these are the two conditions which are going to differentiate between the variant of the detection algorithm which we are going to use. So first of all, let us see, when the resource type, each of the resource type is having only one single instance. We are not talking about any multiple instances of any of the resource type here. So in order to detect the deadlock in case your each resource type is having a single instance, the system is going to use a variant of the resource allocation graph, and this variant is called wait for graph. Now what kind of variant of resource allocation graph I am talking about? Before going into that, let us recall it in a nutshell, that what actually a resource allocation graph is. A resource allocation graph is a graph between the processes and the resources. Now if a particular resource has been allocated to the process, there is an edge from resource to the process, and if a process is waiting for the resource, looking for that particular resource, then there is going to be an edge from process to the resource. Now, this was about our resource allocation graph, and these edges are basically called allocation edge and the request edge. Now here the variant which we are talking about of this resource allocation graph is known as wait for graph. Now, what is this wait for graph, and how are we going to get this wait for graph? Is we are going to obtain this graph from this resource allocation graph by removing the resource nodes and collapsing the appropriate edges. Now, what kind of appropriate edges I am talking about, I will be taking it in a short while. So, first of all, we are going to perform two steps on this resource allocation graph. One is all the resources are going to be removed, only process nodes will be there, and some edges are also going to be collapsed. Now, in a wait for graph, let us say if there is an edge from the process Pi to process Pj, that implies that Pi is waiting for the Pj to release a resource that is actually required by Pi. So, for example, there is a process P1 and another process P2, and in wait for graph there is a edge between P1 and P2. That means P1 is waiting for Pj to release some of these resources, or at least one of its resource, and that resource is also required by P1. Now, how are we going to we can say coin this edge, or how are we going to insert this edge in the wait for graph? So, every edge from one process to another in the resource graph will come from this particular procedure. That is, an edge from Pi to Pj in wait for graph exists if and only if the corresponding resource allocation graph contains two edges. One is from Pi to Rq and another one is from Rq to Pj for some resource Rq. Now, let us try to understand this with the help of a figure. In the left hand side of the screen, you have one resource allocation graph, and its corresponding wait for graph is actually shown on the right side. Now, the first step which I was talking about, that please notice that there are no resource nodes in your wait for graph, only process nodes are there. So, we have taken, let us say in order to construct this wait for graph, we have taken 5 nodes which are P1, P2, P3, P4 and P5 corresponding to 5 processes and none for resources. Now, if there is an edge from P1 to, let us say, a resource, and from that particular resource to P2, then there is going to be an edge from P1 to P2. So, for example, if you can see here in the resource allocation graph, notice an edge from P1 to R1 and then from R1 to P2. What does it actually mean? This actually means that R1 is allocated to P2 and P1 has also requested for R1. That means P1 is having some of its dependency in terms of in terms of releasing the resources on P2. So, there is an edge in the wait for graph from P1 to P2. Let us take an one more example. Now, we have an edge from P2 to R4 in resource allocation graph, of course, and from, let us say, R3 we take. So, P2 to R3 and then from R3 to P4 in the bottom side, in the we can say lower triangle of the resource allocation graph, we have from P2 to R3 and then from R3 to P4. Now, that means R3 is currently allocated to P4 and also P2 is looking for that particular resource which is R3. So, then there is an edge from P2 P4 in our corresponding wait for graph. So, here in this way we are going to tweak a little bit our resource allocation graph and we are going to get the corresponding wait for graph. Now, wait for graph, it's okay that we have got this wait for graph by removing the resource node and by we can say collapsing the appropriate edges or collapsing some edges which are qualifying a particular condition, we can say. Yeah, fine, we have got our this wait for graph, but what next? So in this wait for graph we are going to look for a cycle. So a deadlock exists in the system if and only if the wait for graph is containing a cycle, and in order to detect the deadlocks the system needs to maintain the wait for graph and periodically invoke an algorithm that searches for a cycle in the graph. So if a system, so in nutshell we can say, if a system wants to detect the deadlock, the wait for graph has to be maintained or has to be kind of we can say updated for regular intervals, and periodically that wait for graph has also be checked for detection of for presence of cycle into that particular graph. So if there is cycle in the graph then the deadlock exists, and if there are no cycles in the deadlock we can say that yes, the system is in kind of we can say a safe state and the deadlock is not existing. So this was actually we have started with the deadlock detection algorithm and or deadlock detection mechanism we can say, and we have seen what is going to be the mechanism for detecting the deadlock in case our all resource types of the system are having only one instance of each resource type. Now this is kind of a we can say it's a very restrictive policy. We also have resource types which are having several instances, and that's a very practical possibility. For example, we have printers and there are 3 instances of the printers, we have tape drives, there are n instances of the tape drives, and so on and so forth. So several instances of a resource type is perfectly possible. But unfortunately this wait for graph scheme is not going to be work for the resource allocation system with multiple instances of each resource type. For multiple instances of each resource type scenarios, we need to employ a separate algorithm, and these separate algorithm are going to use some time varying data structures, as in available matrix, the need matrix, and so on and so forth. And all these data structures are actually similar to what we have used in the banker's algorithm, and this is a separate algorithm. And then we also check kind of increasing of one particular values of one particular matrix and decreasing of another, and we determine the deadlock existence, or we try to detect the presence of deadlock in case all the resource type or in case the resource types are having several algorithms. Now till this point we have seen what is the kind of detection algorithm which we need to invoke. In single instance case it is going to be a wait for graph, detection of cycle in wait for graph, and in a multiple instance case this is going to be altogether very different algorithm. But the question here comes is when are we going, because this is actually a detection algorithm, this is not this is not avoidance, or this is not prevention, this has to be kind of run either or we can say at a particular interval of time, or it could be kind of very frequent interval of time. So the question which I am trying to impose here is when to invoke the deadlock detection algorithm. So this answer of this question, that when to invoke this deadlock detection algorithm, actually depends on how often a deadlock is likely to occur. That means we can say how heavy our system is, and in that situation when a deadlock is kind of happening or a deadlock is occurring, how many processes will be affected by it when it is going to happen. So first question, or the first I can say sub question arises, that how often a deadlock is likely to occur in that particular system, and how many processes will be affected by that particular deadlock when it is happening. So deadlocks, please recall, are actually kind of stuck up situation when some processes are making a request and that cannot be granted immediately. Now when we need to detect or when we need to invoke the detection algorithm, the deadlock detection algorithm, at every point of time when a request for the allocation cannot be granted immediately. So a system is going to catch the scenario, or system is going to kind of, we can say, detect the scenario that request has been made for some resources for by a particular process, and that request is not granted immediately. So if request is not granted immediately, that means there is something fishy, there could be a deadlock. Then in that situation a deadlock detection algorithm should kind of, we can say, execute or should run, and it should also identify two things. One is, what are the set of deadlocked processes which are stuck in the deadlock. So for example, we have 10 processes, and out of those 5 has 5 are stuck in the deadlock. Let's say from P1 to P10, only P1 to P5 are stuck with the deadlock. So what all processes are stuck with the deadlock? That is the first thing which we need to identify. Also the specific process that caused the deadlock, or more specifically we can say which is the process which is the culprit one. So now, yes, we have seen when we need to run this deadlock detection algorithm, but what is going to be the consequences of execution of this deadlock detection algorithm is, every time running this algorithm incurs considerable overhead in the computation time. So I mean, every time we need to see that is there any process which is not being granted the resources immediately. Again, is there any process which is not being granted the resources immediately, and then so on and so forth. So we keep on checking for that particular process. If there is such process, we kind of try to execute deadlock detection algorithm, and then deadlock detection algorithm will tells us that whether there is a deadlock, yes or no. If yes, what are the processes which are stuck within the deadlock, and who is the culprit one, so that we can employ a suitable mechanism for recovery from the deadlock, because the deadlock has has taken place, it has happened. Okay, but this is going to obviously incur overhead in terms of computation time. So can we set some conditions or some triggers as to when a deadlock detection algorithm has to be invoked? So for example, we can say maybe once per hour, or whenever your CPU utilization is going to drop below a certain percentage. So for example, my CPU utilization is dropping below 30%, and then obviously I need to run a deadlock detection algorithm. So this basically deadlock detection algorithm is invoked at arbitrary points in time, and the resource graph may contain many cycles. Now how are we going to kind of identify, as I was telling you, how are we going to identify the culprit? Basically, which process has caused, or which process or which processes have caused the deadlocked, and also which are the affected processes, because this is this calculation or this statistics is going to give us a very a roadmap about for recovery from the deadlock, because till this point what we have seen is deadlock detection algorithm. So we have seen deadlock detection algorithm for single instances of resource type. We have also seen deadlock detection algorithm. We have also kind of discussed in brief, very brief, the deadlock detection algorithm for multiple resources, multiple instances of resource type. Fine. Then we have seen when to run this deadlock detection algorithm and what to look for as an output. So now the situation says your deadlock has occurred. Fine. The next step is you need to make your system recover from that particular deadlock. So after determining this process comes after determining the existence of deadlock. There could be two situations. One is you leave your operator deal with the deadlock manually. That could be one idea, which was actually okay with kind of batch systems or legacy systems, we can say. But nowadays we generally kind of the nowadays computer industry is looking for minimizing the human intervention. So this is kind of a, we can say, a non-preferable solution. Another solution of recovery from the deadlock could be you kind of allow the system to recover from the deadlock automatically. So how this is going to happen, that you need to abort one or more processes in order to break the circular wait. Please recall that circular wait is one of the necessary conditions for the occurrence of deadlock, and if the deadlock has occurred, that means there is going to be a circular wait. There is a circular wait. Now in order to break this circular wait, we need to abort one or more processes, and the next idea is to preempt some resources from one or more of the deadlock processes. For example, 5 processes are in the deadlock and they have acquired some set of resources, and as they are in deadlock, they are kind of not moving further. So isn't it a good idea to take resources back from them? So this is what is called kind of preemption of some resources from one or more of the deadlock processes. So now let us try to kind of dive in further into these two ideas. One idea is about process termination. Now which processes we are going to abort or which processes we are going to terminate. So I understand that this is kind of an economic decision as in the process termination is if we are going to look for a particular process which we need to terminate, then we are looking for the minimal costing. That means our system should be paying minimal cost for that termination. So one idea is you abort all the deadlocked processes, very costly here. Why? Because these deadlock processes have done some certain amount of computation, some certain amount of processing, and if we are going to abort them, these all calculations, these all computations will be discarded and will have to be recomputed again later. Or another idea is we need to abort one process at a time until the deadlock is eliminated. But in both the situations we are going to have a considerable overhead. Now after each process is abort, for example there are 5 processes which are stuck in the deadlock. We have came to know about the existence of deadlock, and after each process is aborted, the deadlock detection algorithm must be invoked, and we need to check whether there are any more processes which are still deadlocked. But whether we are going to abort one process or we are going to abort all processes at once, they are going to leave the process in an inconsistent state, and this involves a lot of overhead and all the partial computations will be discarded. So this process termination comes with its own kind of set of challenges and cost. So let us try to recap that what we have seen in this particular lecture. We have seen deadlock detection, 2 types of deadlock detection, for single instance and for multiple instances of resource type, when to invoke this deadlock detection. And after detection of deadlock, we proceeded with recovery from deadlock, and within this recovery from deadlock we have examined the scenario of process termination, I can say, and here is a list of references which is being used for the preparation of lecture. Hope you have enjoyed the lecture. I'll see you in the next one. Till then, goodbye, take care.